The call came while I was being prepped for emergency surgery. "Your brother sold the company," my wife whispered, trying not to upset me before they put me under. 8 hours of brain surgery, and I woke up to find our father's 40-year-old trucking business sold to a competitor for $2 million cash. "Quick sale," my brother Tony said. "Dad's medical bills?" My confusion from the surgery made me slow to respond, but not too slow to remember one crucial detail. Dad's will had been changed 3 years ago. Tony was still executor, but I was the sole beneficiary. He'd just sold my inheritance. If you've ever been betrayed while fighting for your life, subscribe to hear how justice works even when you're unconscious. Let me tell you how my brother's greed collided with legal reality. While I had a golf ball-sized tumor removed from my brain, my name is Jake Patterson, 45 years old, and until recently, heir to Patterson Trucking, one of the largest independent freight companies in Ohio. My father, William Patterson, started with one truck in 1983, hauling steel between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. By 2023, we had 127 trucks, 200 employees, and annual revenue of $45 million. I grew up in those trucks. While other kids went to summer camp, I rode shotgun with Dad, learning every route, every client, every detail of the business. My older brother Tony went to college, got his MBA, worked for consulting firms. I got my CDL at 18 and started driving. One son for the books, one for the roads. Dad used to say the irony was that Tony, with all his education, never understood trucking. He saw spreadsheets and profit margins. I saw drivers with families, relationships with dispatchers, the trust, required to haul $500,000 of someone else's goods across the country. When Tony presented optimization plans, I knew which ones would destroy morale. When I suggested route changes, they came from thousands of hours on those exact roads. By 2015, I was operations manager. By 2018, vice president. Tony worked for Ernst & Young, visiting occasionally, offering unsolicited advice about modernization and efficiency. Dad listened politely, then ignored him. "Your brother's smart," he'd tell me, "but he doesn't smell like diesel. This business runs on diesel and trust, not PowerPoints." Everything changed in 2020 when Dad was diagnosed with lung cancer. Stage 3, aggressive treatment required. Tony flew in from New York, suddenly interested in family matters. "We need to discuss succession planning," he announced at the hospital. Dad was still groggy from chemo, but his response was clear. "Jake runs the company, has for years." Tony's face darkened. "I'm the eldest. I have an MBA. I understand business." Dad laughed, which turned into coughing. "You understand business theory. Jake understands Patterson Trucking. Different things." The argument that followed was ugly. Tony accused me of manipulating Dad. I accused Tony of only caring about money. Dad ended it by asking Tony to leave. 3 months later, Dad called me to his room at Cleveland Clinic. His lawyer, Margaret Chun, was there with documents. "I'm changing my will," Dad said simply. "Tony remains executor. He's good with paperwork, but the company goes to you. All of it." I protested, said we should split it. Dad shook his head. "Tony would sell to the highest bidder within a year. You'll run it for another 40. Sign here as witness." We kept the change quiet. Tony lived in New York, stayed executor, assumed. He'd inherit half of everything. Dad saw no point in another fight while battling cancer. "Let him think what he wants," Dad said. "The paperwork speaks for itself." Margaret filed the will, gave Dad a copy, gave me a copy, kept the original in her safe. Simple, clean, legal. For 3 years, I ran Patterson Trucking while Dad fought cancer. Good months and bad months, remission and relapse. Tony visited quarterly, reviewed finances, made suggestions we politely ignored. The company thrived. We added routes, upgraded equipment, kept our drivers happy. Dad watched from his bed, proud. "You're proving me right," he'd say. In January 2023, I started getting headaches. Brutal, disorienting pain that made driving impossible. Dizzy spells followed. Then the seizure in our dispatch office. The MRI revealed a tumor pressing against my temporal lobe. "Benign," Dr. Martinez explained, "but in a dangerous location. It needs to come out quickly." Surgery was scheduled for March 15th. I spent 2 weeks preparing, assigning temporary management, updating insurance, making sure everything could run without me. I called Tony, told him about the surgery. "I'll fly in," he offered. "Help with Dad while you're recovering." For once, his concern seemed genuine. I accepted gratefully. What I didn't know was that Dad's condition had suddenly worsened. The cancer had spread to his brain. Hospice was called. The end was near. In my pre-surgery haze of medications and preparation, I missed the signs. My wife Sarah tried to prepare me. "Your dad's not doing well, Jake." But I was focused on my own mortality, my own fears. I'd see Dad after surgery, I thought. We'd recover. Together, March 15th, 2023, 5 a.m., Sarah drove me to Cleveland Clinic, the same hospital where Dad lay dying 3 floors above where I'd have surgery. I wanted to see him, but Dr. Martinez said no. "You're already sedated. Infection risk. You'll see him when you wake up." Sarah promised to check on him, to tell him I loved him. At 6:47 a.m., while I was being marked for incision, William Patterson died. Quietly, peacefully, with Tony by his side. Tony, who'd flown in the night before. Tony, who'd been named executor 3 years ago. Tony, who didn't know the will had been changed. At the moment of Dad's death, I became the sole owner of Patterson Trucking. 7 minutes later, I was wheeled into surgery. Tony worked fast. By 7:15 a.m., he was on the phone with Margaret Chun. "Dad's gone. I need to execute the will immediately." Margaret, dealing with her own grief, agreed to meet him at 8 a.m. By 7:30 a.m., Tony had called our competitor, Midwest Freight Lines. Patterson Trucking might be available. Interested? By 7:45 a.m., he had a verbal offer, $2 million cash. Quick. Close. Sarah found out when she went to check on Dad and found an empty bed. "Where's William?" she asked the nurse. "He passed this morning. His son Tony handled arrangements." Sarah called Tony, confused. "Why didn't you tell us?" "You had enough to worry about," Tony said smoothly. "Jake's in surgery. I'm handling everything." While Dr. Martinez carefully removed a tumor from my brain, Tony orchestrated the dismantling of Patterson Trucking. He met with Margaret Chun at 8 a.m., presented himself as executor, requested immediate asset liquidation for medical expenses and estate obligations. Margaret, unaware of the timing, began the process. By 10 a.m., Tony had obtained emergency letters testamentary as executor, contacted 3 potential buyers, scheduled Patterson Trucking's valuation, initiated emergency liquidation procedures. This cover story was perfect. Dad's medical bills were substantial. My brain surgery would be expensive. The company needed immediate cash for family medical crises. Who would question an executor acting in the family's best interest during such tragedy? Midwest Freight, smelling blood, moved aggressively. They knew Patterson Trucking was worth $8 million minimum. Our contracts alone were worth $5 million annually. But Tony, playing the desperate executor, accepted $2 million. "Family emergency," he explained. "Need cash today." Papers were drawn up, transfers initiated, deals structured. By noon, As Dr. Martinez was delicately separating tumor from healthy brain tissue, Tony was signing away my inheritance. By 2 p.m., as I lay in recovery, still unconscious, the sale was complete. Patterson Trucking, built over 40 years, sold in 6 hours. Tony took his executor's fee, $200,000, and disappeared back to New York. I woke up 3 days later. The surgery was successful. Tumor removed, brain function intact. But I woke to a nightmare. Sarah was crying. "Your dad's gone, Jake. The funeral was yesterday." Tony said we couldn't wait. I tried to process this through the fog of medication. Dad dead. Funeral missed. Tony in charge. "There's more," Sarah said carefully. Tony sold the company, said it was necessary. Medical bills. My heart monitor spiked. The nurses rushed in. "Mr. Patterson needs to stay calm," they insisted. But how could I stay calm? My father was dead, and my brother had sold my inheritance. While I was unconscious, it took another 2 days before I was coherent enough to demand answers. Tony, back in New York, was brief on the phone. "Had to move fast. Estate obligations. You are incapacitated." As executor, I made the necessary decisions. "The company was mine," I said weakly. "Dad left it to me." Tony laughed. "Nice try, Jake, but I've seen the will. We split everything 50-50. I just liquidated your half early. That's when I played my card. Call Margaret Chun. Ask her about the 2020 codicil." Silence. "What codicil?" "The one that makes me sole beneficiary of Patterson Trucking." "Your executor, Tony, but you just sold my property." Tony panicked, called Margaret, who confirmed the will change. Called the buyers, who'd already taken possession. Called his lawyer, who explained the magnitude of his mistake. As executor, Tony had a fiduciary duty to protect estate assets for beneficiaries. Instead, he'd sold the primary asset to benefit himself, taking a $200,000 executor fee from a sale that shouldn't have happened. My recovery was motivated by rage. Physical therapy, cognitive exercises, legal consultations, all fueled by the betrayal. My lawyer, David Sterling, was blunt. "Your brother committed multiple felonies. Breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, possibly embezzlement. The sale happened after your father's death, making you the legal owner. Tony had no right to sell. Midwest Freight, realizing they'd bought stolen property, tried to negotiate. We'll pay fair market value, they offered. Make this go away. But I didn't want money. I wanted justice. And I wanted Patterson Trucking back. Not for sale, I told them. Never was." The criminal investigation began in April. Prosecutors found Tony's plan was premeditated. He'd researched Patterson Trucking's value weeks before Dad's death, contacted buyers in advance, prepared paperwork. He'd gambled on Dad dying during my surgery, giving him a window to act. He'd won that gamble, but lost everything else. The trial began in September 2023. I was still recovering, occasional headaches, some memory issues, but clear enough to testify. Tony's defense was creative. He claimed emergency circumstances, claimed he thought the 2020 will change, was invalid due to Dad's cancer, claimed he was protecting family assets. The prosecutor destroyed each claim methodically. The evidence was damning. Phone records showing Tony contacting buyers before Dad's death. Emails negotiating price while I was in surgery. Bank records showing the $200,000 executor fee hitting. Tony's account, the rushed sale at 25% of fair market value. The most damaging evidence was Tony's own words, recorded by Midwest Freight's legal team during negotiations. "My brother's got a brain tumor. Probably won't make it. Even if he does, you'll be a vegetable. Someone needs to take charge." The recording played in court. I watched Tony shrink in his chair. Margaret Shawn testified about the will change, how competent Dad was, how clear his intentions were. William Patterson knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted Jake to have the company. Period. She produced the original will, Dad's handwritten notes, the video recording of the signing. Tony's claim of invalidity crumbled. The verdict was swift, guilty on all counts. Breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, elder financial abuse, selling Dad's assets without proper authority. The sentence, 3 to 5 years in federal prison, full restitution, loss of executor status. Tony wept at sentencing. I was trying to help the family, he claimed. The judge wasn't moved. You helped yourself to $200,000 while your brother was having brain surgery. That's not help. That's predation. The civil case with Midwest Freight was complex, but ultimately successful. The sale was voided. Legally, it never happened. They had to return Patterson Trucking intact. They sued Tony for their losses. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. They'd tried to exploit a family crisis for profit. They'd learned an expensive lesson about due diligence. By December 2023, I was back at Patterson Trucking. The drivers had kept everything running, loyal despite the chaos. We knew you'd be back, my dispatcher told me. Your dad always said you were too stubborn to die and too honest to steal. We had a memorial service for Dad in the main garage. All 127 trucks lined up, air horns blasting a final salute. Today, Patterson Trucking is stronger than ever. The attempted sale, ironically, proved our value. Clients who'd worried about our stability after Dad's death saw we couldn't be bought, couldn't be destroyed by family drama. We added 15 new trucks, 30 new drivers, expanded into 3 new states. Dad would be proud. I still get headaches sometimes. The surgery was successful, but brain surgery leaves marks. I can't drive long hauls anymore. The seizure risk is too high, but I can run the company Dad left me, honor the legacy he protected with. That will change. Every truck that rolls out carries his name and his values. Tony serves his time in minimum security. He writes occasionally, apologies, explanations, justifications. I don't respond. What's there to say? He saw opportunity in tragedy and took it. I saw betrayal in recovery and fought it. One of us is in prison. One of us runs a trucking company. Dad would say that's justice. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about family, business, and preparation. Dad changing his will wasn't about favoritism. It was about preservation. He knew Tony would sell. He knew I would build. The will change protected Patterson Trucking from exactly what Tony tried to do. The timing was almost poetic. Dad died at 6:47 a.m., making me the owner. Tony started selling at 7 a.m., making him a thief. If Dad had died during my surgery, Tony might have had a claim. If he'd waited until after probate, he'd have discovered the truth legally. But greed doesn't wait, and crime doesn't pay. My brain tumor, weirdly, saved Patterson Trucking. If I'd been healthy when Dad died, Tony wouldn't have acted so boldly. He'd have proceeded normally, discovered the will change, accepted it grudgingly. But my surgery created what he thought was opportunity. His predatory instincts revealed his character and sealed his fate. The family is broken, probably permanently. Tony's wife divorced him during the trial. His kids, my nephews, are confused and angry. I've set up college funds for them. They shouldn't suffer for their father's crimes. But Tony and I will never reconcile. You can forgive many things, but selling your inheritance while you're having brain surgery isn't one of them. Sarah stood by me through everything. The surgery, the recovery, the trial, the business restoration. In sickness and in health, she reminded me. Though I don't think the vows covered brain tumors and felonious brothers-in-law. We laugh about it now, darkly. What else can you do? Dad's grave has a simple headstone. William Patterson, 1952 to 2023, builder of roads and lives. I visit monthly, tell him about the company, new contracts, driver milestones. Sometimes I tell him about Tony, how prison is treating him. I think Dad would be sad, but not surprised. Your brother's smart, he'd said, but he doesn't smell like diesel. Turns out he smelled like greed. Instead, my name is Jake Patterson. I survived a brain tumor and a brother's betrayal, both removed by skilled professionals. The tumor took 8 hours of surgery. The betrayal took 8 months of litigation. Both left scars, but I'm still here, still running Patterson Trucking, still honoring my father's legacy. Tony thought my unconsciousness was his opportunity. He moved fast, sold cheap, took his fee, fled to New York. But paper trails don't lie. Wills don't disappear, and selling something that isn't yours is still theft, even if your brother's in a coma. Especially if your brother's in a coma. To those facing family betrayal during medical crisis, document everything. Update your wills. Choose executors wisely. And remember, the person holding your hand in the hospital might be counting your assets. My brother sold my inheritance while I was having brain surgery. But inheritance isn't just money or property. It's also values, legacy, and the legal system that protects both. Patterson Trucking rolls on, 127 trucks strong, carrying freight and my father's memory across America. Tony sits in prison, his MBA useless in the commissary. I get headaches, but run a thriving business. He has no headaches, but no freedom. Dad would call that poetic justice. I call it proof that timing isn't everything truth is. The call came while I was being prepped for emergency surgery. Your brother sold the company. 8 hours later, I woke up to betrayal. 8 months later, justice woke up too. Sometimes that's how long truth takes to catch up with greed. But it always does. Eventually. Even if you're unconscious for the first part of the race.